Chapter 7, Brave New World. The mesa was like a ship becalmed in a strait of lion-colored dust. The channel wound between precipitous banks, and slanting from one wall to the other across the valley ran green, a streak of green, the river and its fields. On the prow of that stone ship in the center of the strait, and seemingly part of it, a shaped and geometrical outcrop of the naked rock, stood the pueblo of Malpais. Block above block, each story smaller than the one below, the tall houses rose like stepped and amputated pyramids in the blue sky. At their feet lay a straggle of low buildings, a crisscross of walls, and on three sides of the precipices fell sheer into the plain. A few columns of smoke mounted perpendicularly into the windless air and were lost. Queer, said Lenina, very queer. It was her ordinary word of condemnation. I don't like it, and I don't like that man. She pointed to the Indian guide who had been appointed to take them up to the pueblo. Her feeling was evidently reciprocated. The very back of the man, as he walked along before them, was hostile, sullenly contemptuous. Besides, she lowered her voice, he smells. Bernard did not attempt to deny it. They walked on. Suddenly, it was as though the whole air had come alive and were pulsing with the indefatigable moment of blood. Up there in Malpais, the drums were being beaten. Their feet fell with the rhythm of that mysterious heart. They quickened the pace. Their path led them to the foot of the precipice. The sides of the great mesa ship towered over them, 300 feet to the gunwale. I wish we could have brought the plane, said Lenina, looking up resentfully at the blank, impending rock face. I hate walking, and you feel so small when you're on the ground at the bottom of the hill. They walked along for some way in the shadow of the mesa, rounded a projection, and there, in a water-worn ravine, was the way up to the companion ladder. They climbed. It was a very steep path that zigzagged from side to side of the gully. Sometimes the pulse of the drum was all but inaudible, and others they seemed to be beating only just round the corner. When they were halfway up, an eagle flew past, so close to them that the wind of the wings blew chill on their faces. In a crevice of the rock lay a pile of bones. It was all oppressively queer, and the Indians smelt stronger and stronger. They emerged at last from the ravine into the full sunlight. The top of the mesa was a flat deck of stone. Like the Charing-T Tower, was Lenina's comment, but she was not allowed to enjoy her discovery of the reassuring resemblance for long. A padding of soft feet made them turn round, naked from throat to navel, their dark brown bodies painted with white lines like asphalt tennis courts, Lenina was later to explain, their faces inhumane with daubings of scarlet, black, or ochre. Two Indians came running along the path. Their black hair was braided with fox fur and red flannel. Cloaks of turkey feathers fluttered from their shoulders. Hung feather diadems exploded gaudily round their heads. With every step they took came the clink and rattle of their silver bracelets, their heavy necklaces of bone and turquoise beads. They came on without a word, running quietly in their deerskin moccasins. One of them was holding a feather brush. The other carried in either hand what looked at a distance like 3 or 4 pieces of thick rope. One of the ropes withered uneasily, and suddenly Lenina saw that they were snakes. The men came nearer and nearer. Their dark eyes looked at her, but without giving any sign of recognition, any smallest sign that they had seen her or aware of her existence. The withering snake hung limp against the rest. The men passed. I don't like it, said Lenina. I don't like it. She liked even less what awaited her at the entrance to the pueblo, where the guide had left them while he went inside for instructions. The dirt, to start with, the piles of rubbish, the dust, the dogs, the flies. Her face wrinkled up into a grimace of disgust. She held her handkerchief to her nose. But how can they live like this? She broke out in a voice of indignant incredulity. It wasn't possible. Bernard shrugged his shoulders philosophically. Anyhow, he said, they've been doing it for the last 5 or 6,000 years, so I suppose they must be used to it by now. But cleanliness is next to forwardliness, she insisted. Yes, and civilization is sterilization, Bernard went on, concluding on a tone of irony the second hypnopedic lesson in the elementary hygiene. But these people have never heard of our Ford, and they aren't civilized. So there's no point in, oh, she gripped his arm. Look! An almost naked Indian was very slowly climbing down the ladder for the first floor terrace of the neighboring house, rung after rung with the tremulous caution of extreme old age. His face was profoundly wrinkled and black like a mask of obsidian. The toothless mouth had fallen in. At the corners of the lips on each side of the chin, a few long bristles gleamed almost white against the dark skin. Oop. The long, unbraided hair hung in gray wisps round his face. His body was bent and emaciated to the bone, almost fleshless. Very slowly he came down, pausing at each rung before he ventured another step. What's the matter with him? Whispered Lenina. Her eyes were wide with horror and amazement. He's old, that's all, Bernard answered as carelessly as he could. He, too, was startled, but he made an effort to seem unmoved. Old, she repeated. But the director's old. Lots of people are old. They're not like that. That's because we don't allow them to be like that. We preserve them from diseases. We keep their internal secretions artificially balanced at a youthful equilibrium. We don't permit their magnesium-calcium ratio to fall below what it was at 30. We give them transfusions of young blood. We keep their metabolism permanently stimulated. So of course they don't look like that. Partly, he added, because most of them die long before they reach this old creature's age. Youth almost unimpaired till 60 and then crack, the end. But Lenina was not listening. She was watching the old man. Slowly he came down. His feet touched the ground. He turned. In the deep sunken orbits of his eyes were still extraordinarily bright. In their deep sunken orbits, his eyes were still extraordinarily bright. They looked at her for a long moment expressionlessly, without surprise, as though she had not been there at all, then slowly went back, with back bent. The old man hobbled past them and was gone. But it's terrible, Lenina whispered. It's awful. We ought not to have come here. She felt in her pocket for some soma, only to discover that, by some unprecedented oversight, she had left the bottle down at the rest house. Bernard's pockets were also empty. Lenina was left to face the horrors of Malpais unaided. They came crowding in on her thick and fast. The spectacle of two young women giving breast to their babies made her blush and turn away her face. She had never seen anything so indecent in her life. And what made it worse was that instead of tactfully ignoring it, Bernard proceeded to make open comments on this revolting, viviparous scene. Ashamed now that the effect of the soma had worn off, of the weakness he had displayed that morning in the hotel, he went on his way to show himself strong and unorthodox. What a wonderfully intimate relationship, he said, deliberately outrageous. And what an intensity of feeling it must generate. I often think of how one may have missed something in not having had a mother. And perhaps you've missed something in not being a mother, Lenina. Imagine yourself sitting there with a little baby of your own. Bernard, how can you? The passage of an old woman with ophthalmia and a disease of the skin distracted her from her indignation. Let's go away, she begged. I don't like it. But at this moment their guide came back and, beckoning them to follow, led the way down the narrow street between the houses. They rounded a corner. A dead dog was lying on a rubbish heap. A woman with goiter was looking for lice in the hair of a small girl. Their guide halted at the foot of a ladder, raised his hand perpendicularly, then darted it horizontally forward. They did what he mutely commanded, climbed the ladder, and walked through the doorway to which it gave access in a long, narrow room, rather dark and smelled of smoke and cooked grease, and long unwashed clothes. At the further end of the room was another doorway through which came a shaft of sunlight and the noise, very loud and close, of the drums. They stepped across the threshold and found themselves on a wide terrace. Below them, shut in by tall houses, was the village square, crowded by Indians, bright blanks and feathers in their hairs, and the glint of turquoise and dark skin shining with heat. Lenina put her handkerchief to her nose again. In the open space of the center of the square were two circular platforms of masonry and trampled clay. The roofs, it was evident, of underground chambers, for in the center of each platform was an open hatchway, with ladder emerging from the lower darkness. A sound of subterranean flute playing came up and almost lost in the steady, remorseless persistence of the drum. Lenina liked the drums. Shutting her eyes, she abandoned herself to their soft, repeating thunder, allowing it to pervade her consciousness more and more completely, till at last there was nothing left in the world but that one deep pulse of sound. It reminded her reassuringly of the synthetic noises made at the solitary service of Ford Celebration Day. Orgy porgy, she whispered to herself. These drums beat out just the same rhythms. There was a sudden, startling burst of singing, hundreds of male voices crying out fiercely in harsh metallic unison. A few long notes in silence, the thunderous silence of drums, then shrill in their neighing tremble the women's arms, then again the drums, and once more the men's deep savage affirmation of their manhood. Queer, yes, this place was queer, so was the music, so were the clothes, so were the goiters and the skin's diseases and the old people, but the performance itself, there seemed to be nothing specially queer about that. It reminds me of a lower caste community sing, she told Bernard. But a little later it was reminding her of a good deal less of that innocuous function, for suddenly they had swarmed up from those round chambers underground, a ghastly troop of monsters, hideously masked and painted out of all semblances of humanity. They had tramped out a strange limping dance round the square, round and again round, singing as they went round and round, each time a little faster, and the drum had changed and quickened their rhythm so that it became like the pulsing of fever in the ears, and the crowd had begun to sing with the dancers, and louder. First one woman had shrieked, and then another, as though they were being killed, and then suddenly the leader of the dancers broke out of line and ran to a big wooden chest, which was standing at one end of the square, raised the lid and pulled out a pair of black snakes. A great yell went up from the crowd, and all the other dancers ran toward him with outstretched hands. He tossed the snakes to the first comers, then dipped back into the chest for more and more, black snakes and brown and mottled. He flung them out. And then the dance began again on a different rhythm. Round and round they went with their snakes, snakily, with a soft undulating movement at the knee of the hips. Round and round, then the leader gave a signal, and one after another, all the snakes were flung down in the middle of the square, and an old man came up from underground and sprinkled them with cornmeal. And from the other hatchway came a woman and sprinkled them with water from a black jar. Then the old man lifted his hand, and startlingly, terrifyingly, there was absolute silence. The drums stopped beating. Life seemed to have come to an end. The old man pointed toward the two hatchways, which gave entrance to the lower world, and slowly, raised by invisible hands from below, there emerged from the one a painted image of an eagle, and from the other that of a man naked and nailed to a cross. They hung together, seemingly self-sustained, as though watching. The old man clapped his hands, naked but for a white cotton breechcloth. A boy about 18 stepped out of the crowd and stood before him, his hands crossed over his chest, his head bowed. The old man made the sign of the cross over him and turned away. Slowly the boy began to walk round the withering heap of snakes. He had completed the first circuit and was halfway through the second when, from among the dancers, a tall man wearing the mask of a coyote, holding in his hand a whip of plaited leather, advanced toward him. The boy moved on as though unaware of the other's existence. The coyote man raised his whip. There was a long moment of expectancy, then a swift moment, and the whistle of the lash and its loud, flat-sounding impact on the flesh. The boy's body quivered, but he made no sound. He walked on at the same slow, steady pace. The coyote struck again, and at every blow, at first a gasp, and then a deep groan went up from the crowd. The boy walked twice, thrice, 4 times round he went. The blood was streaming. 5 times round, 6 times round. Suddenly, Lenina covered her face with her hands and began to sob. "Oh, stop them, she implored, but the whips fell and fell inexorably. 7 times round, then all at once the boy staggered and, still without a sound, pitched forward onto his face. Bending over him, the old man touched his back with a long white feather, held it up for a moment, crimson and for the people to see, then shook it thrice over the snakes. A few drops fell, and suddenly the drum broke out again into a panic of hurrying notes. There was a great shout. The dancers rushed forward, picked up the snakes, and ran out of the square. Men, women, and children all crowded. All the crowd ran after them. A minute later, the square was empty. Only the boy remained, prone where he had fallen, quite still. 3 old women came out of one of the houses with some differently lifted him and carried him in. The eagle and the man were on the cross kept guard for a little while over the empty pueblo. Then, as though they had seen enough, sank slowly down through their hatchways out of sight into the netherworld. Lenina was still sobbing. "Too awful," she kept repeating, and all of Bernard's consolations were in vain. "Too awful, that blood," she shuddered. "Oh, I wish I had my Soma." There was the sound of feet in the inner room. Lenina did not move, but sat with her face in her hands, unseeing apart. Only Bernard turned round. The dress of the young man who had stepped out onto the terrace was Indian, but his plaited hair was strawberry-colored, his eyes a pale blue, his skin a white skin, bronzed. "Hello, good morrow," said the stranger in faultless but peculiar English. "You're civilized, aren't you? You come from the other place, outside the reservation." "Who on earth?" Bernard began in astonishment. The young man sighed and shook his head. "A most unhappy gentleman," and pointing to the bloodstains in the center of the square. "Do you see the damn spot?" he asked in a voice that trembled with emotion. "A gram is better than a dam," said Lenina mechanically from behind her hands. "I wish I had my Soma." "I ought to have been there," the young man went on. "Why wouldn't they have let me be the sacrifice? I had gone round 10 times, 12, 15. Palo Huithua only got as far as 7. They could have had twice as much blood from me. The multitudinous seas in Cardinine." He flung out his arms in a great lavish gesture, then despairingly let them fall again. "But they wouldn't let me. They dislike me for my complexion. It's always been that way, always." Tears stood in the young man's eyes. He was ashamed and turned away. Astonishment made Lenina forget the deprivation of Soma. She uncovered her face and for the first time looked at the stranger. "Do you mean that you wanted to be hit with the whip?" Still averted from her, the young man made a sign of affirmation. "For the sake of the pueblo, to make the rain come, the corn grow, and to please Pukong and Jesus, and then to show that I can bear pain without crying out. Yes." And his voice suddenly took on a new resonance. He turned with a proud squaring of his shoulders, a proud, defiant lifting of the chin, "to show that I'm a man. Oh!" He gave a gasp and was silent, gaping. He had seen for the first time in his life the face of a girl whose cheeks were not the color of chocolate or dog skin, whose hair was auburn and permanently waved, whose expression, amazing novelty, was one of benevolent interest. Lenina was smiling at him. Such a nice-looking boy, she was thinking, and a really beautiful body. The blood rushed into the young man's face. He dropped his eyes, raised them again for a moment, only to find her still smiling at him, and was so much overcome that he had to turn away and pretend to be looking very hard at something on the other side of the square. Bernard's questions made a diversion. "Who? How? When? From where? keeping his eyes fixed on Bernard's face, for so passionately did he long to see Lenina smiling that he simply dared not look at her. The young man tried to explain himself. Linda was his mother. The word made Lenina look uncomfortable. Were strangers in the reservation. Linda, who had come from the other place long ago before he was born, with a man who was his father. Bernard pricked up his ears. She had gone walking alone in those mountains over there to the north, had fallen down a steep place and hurt her head. Go on, said Bernard excitedly. Some hunters from Malpais had found her and brought her to the Pueblo. As for the man who was his father, Linda had never seen him again. His name was Tomakin. Yes, Tomas was the DHC's first name. He must have flown away, back to the other place, away from her, a bad, unkind, unnatural man. And so I was born in Malpais, he concluded, in Malpais, and he took his head. The squalor of that little house on the outskirt of the Pueblo, a space of dust and rubbish separated from the village. Two famine-stricken dogs were noising obscenely in the garbage at its door. Inside, when they entered, the twilight stank and was loud with flies. Linda and the young man called. From the inner room, a rather hoarse female voice said, "Coming." They waited. In bowls on the floor were the remains of a meal, perhaps of several meals. The door opened. A very stout blonde squaw stepped across the threshold and stood looking at the strangers, staring incredulously, her mouth opened. Lenina noticed with disgust that the two of the front teeth were missing and the color of that one remained. She shuddered. Okay, I stopped on the top of page 119. You guys will have to read 120, 121, and 122 yourselves.